I love Parsha. I love Siddur. I guess, besides for Chassidus, which is my bread and butter, I like to teach Parsha, I like to teach Siddur. And over the years, I've taught many classes on Parsha, many classes on Siddur. And I had these dreams and these ambitions, things that I'd like to cover, big projects. One of my dreams always was to do each one of the 12 Shvatim. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Yosef, Binyamin. And I started this project a few years ago, and we've done 8 of the Shvatim. Anybody really wants to hear about the Shvatim? Especially about their names and their personalities, you can go to my website, Inside Chassidus.org, go to Parshas Vayeishev.
Fire here, fire.
I'm sorry?
They're so good. Advertisement.
And 2 years ago we did 6, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, Zvulun. Last week we did Dan, Naphtali. So this year I sat down to do Gad. I literally started at 5 o'clock, I just finished. I'm late because I was trying to do the last minute stuff. And the most frustrating thing about this whole endeavor is I need another 2 hours. As much time as I spent, the material, I have a stack of material that I copied. And I read probably 75 or 80% of it, but I didn't read the last 20%, I didn't write notes the last 20%, and most important, I didn't have enough time to think. But it's a fascinating limud. We know about the 12 Shvatim were 12 people, they were men, they were born, they were babies. And in this week's Parshas Vayeishev, 11 of them are born, right? Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda are born. And Leah stops having children. Rachel is jealous of Leah, so she gives her maidservant who gives Bilhah to Yaakov Avinu. And it's interesting, Rashi says, Bilhah was older than Zilpah, even though Rachel was younger than Leah. This is part of Lavan's ruse, right? The way he tricked Yaakov Avinu into taking Leah is because he gave her the younger maidservant. He figured it must be Rachel. And Bilhah has 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali, we talked about last year. And then Leah is thinking, my mazel ran out. One of the many definitions of the word God. God is a 2-letter word, but it's a 2-letter word with so many definitions you go out of your mind. One of the things it says in the Machon is that God means to bring down, to be mamshech, to draw down. Leah saw that her mazel ran out. She had 4 kids in quick succession. Then she stopped having children. So she gave Zilpah to Yaakov Avinu, thinking that maybe Yaakov Avinu through Zilpah will be able to renew her mazel and open up her fountain, and she'll have more children. So when God is born, she names him God, means to bring down the mazel from the Eibishter to Leah, that she should have more children, which of course is what happens. God is born, and Asher is born, and then Leah has 2 more children, Yisachar and Zvulun. Yisachar and Zvulun were younger than Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. They were closest to the age of Yosef and Binyamin. They were destined to be big tzaddikim, of course. And they're the fathers of our nation, right? There's 12 Shvatim. It says in Helikas Sfarim that there are 12 nuschayis, 12 different versions of davening, each one for a different nusach. It further says in nuschayis tefillah that we only have 4 of them. We don't have 12, we only have 4 left. A lot of them got lost. And nobody knows which nusach is his, which is why the Arizal proposed what is called the 13th gate, Shara Koilo, that you should daven a nusach which encompasses all of the 12 Shvatim. The 12 Shvatim are a real thing. After Mashiach comes, there's going to be 12 Shvatim identified in different locations. It's a big trick to figure out who comes from where. But the 12 Shvatim are a serious thing. And as it turns out, the more you learn about the 12 Shvatim, they're very distinct. Each one of them has different personality. The personality of the Shevet is in his name. The personality of his Shevet in his life's history. The personality of the Shevet is in the stone on which his name was carved in the Choshen Mishpat. The personality in the Shevet is where he was placed around the Mishkan in the Midbar, and other details like this. So what I did was I collected material from Parshas Vayeishev, where the Shvatim are born, from Parshas Vayechi, where Yaakov blesses the Shvatim, from Parshas Tetzaveh, where the 12 stones are arranged for each one of the Shvatim, and the Rabbeinu Bechaya goes through each one of the 12 stones and explains how each stone is connected to the personality of each Shevet, plus the color of the stone. The material out of which the stone was made and the color of the stone affects the personality, is related to the personality of each one of the 12 Shvatim. And then there's 2 other places, Parshas Shmos and Parshas Bamidbar, but the last place is V'zeis HaBracha, where Moshe Rabbeinu blesses the 12 Shvatim. And I collected mafarshim from all of these different sources. So for me, this is supposed to be like a comprehensive thing. Through all 5 chamashim, what can we figure out using all the different places in the Torah where Shevet God is spoken of, and what kind of idea can we develop in understanding Shevet God? And what happens is you work, and eventually a picture emerges. In other words, it stops being details and you start to see an image. You start to see a picture. And it ultimately is a very beautiful picture. When you sort of put everything into place, you get a very, very nice sense. Let me begin with this. The Tzemach Tzedek has notes on everything in Chassidus. Tzemach Tzedek's notes are incredible. There's a short little for Tzemach Tzedek where Tzemach Tzedek writes, there are 5 translations to the word God, and the Zohar has the 6th. The 5 translations to the word God are: number 1, God is coriander. God is a kind of a food which is compared to the mun. Number 2, God means a legion, a battalion. God means to cut, to divide, like loises goydedu. God means a goat. God means borders that are overflowing, like Mali al Kol Gedoysov. The Zohar says that God means like Haggadah, to tell a story. And Rashi says that God means Mazel Tov, good mazel. A 2-letter word with such dynamic, such complexity. And when you learn about Shevet God, an interesting personality emerges. And I want to tell you the personality up front. I want to tell you the end of the story. Although I have to be very honest, I did not have enough time. I don't feel comfortable giving this class. The clock says teach, I teach. I needed another hour just to formulate my thoughts. What emerges about God is, number 1, God is very strong. Number 2, God is very confident. Number 3, God is the kind of person you want to get behind. Number 4, God is very successful. Because God has an aura about him. God has an energy about him that's just very, very positive. But God never escapes the fight. That's the irony. In other words, there's something about Shevet God which has to do with struggling, fighting, winning, being successful, being followed. But in the end, you don't seem to find that God achieves peace. In other words, as successful as Shevet God is depicted, is described, in the end there's something about God which is, if I may say, not yet Mashiach. It's almost Mashiach. And now I'm going to develop my class. I'm going to share with you different ideas about God. Leah has 4 sons. Rachel has 2. Leah gives Zilpah to Yaakov Avinu. Why did she give Zilpah to Yaakov Avinu? So in Chumash it says, she says, I want more kids. In the Midrashim it says, Leah says, I'm hoping I'm going to give Zilpah to Yaakov Avinu, so I'll have more kids. And the Pasuk says, God is born. Leah ba God. Leah says ba God. Ba God is 1 word, 3 letters. Beis Gimel Dalet. Ba God. Now you should know that in some Farshim it says that Zilpah was so young, she never ovulated. She never had a period. So no one knew she was pregnant. And she has a baby. No one knew she was pregnant. She has a baby. Boom. Rashi. That's why it doesn't say by her vatar. She was incredibly young. Other people say that the Torah does not write that she was pregnant because Leah told Zilpah, make sure that Rachel doesn't see your pregnancy because she was afraid of Ayin Hara. But Zilpah is born, Zilpah gives birth to God, and Leah says Bagad. Now it should be 4 letters. Beis Aleph is 1 word, but it has come. God. God, Rashi translates Mazel Tov, but it's missing the Aleph. Now in Hebrew, when you have Bagad, man, it's without the Aleph. The word Begida actually means to abuse, to take advantage of, to cheat. Bevigdeva, you have the word in the Chumash in a number of places where the word beged connotes taking advantage of. It actually says in the Medrash that Leah gave Zilpah to Yaakov Avinu, and she never expected Yaakov Avinu to live with Zilpah. Why? She has 4 kids already. She gave Zilpah to Yaakov, not that Yaakov should live with Zilpah, but that Yaakov should give her more children. And when Zilpah gets pregnant and has a baby, Leah says, my sister just got cheated again. Bar God, Rachel got cheated. She did it. She gives Zilpah to Yaakov Avinu, but when Zilpah gets pregnant, has a baby, Leah sort of says, yeah, I wanted more children, but I didn't want more children through her. I wanted children myself. And it has to hurt Rachel more that my maid servant had a baby. I have 4 children of my own, and now I have a 5th from Zilpah. So the word Bagad, that's what the pasuk says, that Bagad, it connotes that abuse, being taken advantage of. It says in Svardim, in Midrashim, that God was born with some kind of an extra skin, which is seen as like a screen, a veil, a covering. This covering masks him, hides him. And this idea that you come into this world with this kind of a screen, kind of a mask, shows on a good thing because it indicates, sort of represents, that there's something about you that is more than meets the eye. And I think that's how you have to understand God. God is a person who, there's more to him than you see on the surface, and the more is good. The more is good. So on the outside, his name is God, to indicate that his whole coming into this world is at the expense of somebody else, Begida. But on the other hand, this idea that he comes into the world with a veil indicates that there's something about him which is more. And this is what it says in the Sfarim, that Zilpah, Leah said to Zilpah, when Leah found out that Zilpah was pregnant, she said to her, you keep yourself as covered as possible. Rachel should not know you're pregnant, which is the same idea. Keep a mask, keep a covering over the pregnancy, so that Rachel shouldn't find out that you're pregnant. I think she was one about Ayanora. So I was thinking, and I was reading this particular Medrash, that it's almost as if Leah is saying, I don't deserve this one. I have this child, God, I don't deserve him. And the only way it came into the world was through, for lack of words, at the expense of somebody else. It's similar to what you had last week, right? Last week was Parshas told us. In Parshas told us, you read about Yaakov stealing the brachas from Esav. And of course, all the Mefarshim ask, why did Yaakov have to steal? And of course, the criminal is not Yaakov Avinu, the criminal is Rivka. But why did the brachas have to come b'mirma? Why couldn't they come straight? Why did Yaakov have to steal them? And there's many, many explanations. And one of the things that's brought in Chassidus is that some things are so high, they can't come straight. They have to come indirectly. And this idea that the word God, or Bog God, connotes that God's birth is that the abuse of somebody else is because God's neshama can only come into the world when there's a bit of a scheme, when there's a bit of a trick, there's something about it which is not straight and not wholesome, because it's the only way his neshama is able to come into this world. It sets the stage of our understanding of God. Now, having told you that Leah herself concedes that the birth of God is sort of at the expense of Rachel, really, and that's the only way God comes into the world, let's talk about God's personality. Number one, the word God means a battalion, a legion, a group of soldiers. In the Kriyas Shema Sha'alamita, we all say every night, God Gedud Yugudenu Hu Yogud Akev. Then we say it backwards, Akev Yogud Hu Yugudenu Gedud. God Gedud Yugudenu Yogud. It's a pasuk in Parshas Vayeishev. Yaakov Avinu blesses God with God Gedud Yugudenu. God Gedud Yugudenu means that his whole idea is mobilizing armies and legions of soldiers. God was the Shevet God were incredible warriors. They were tough, very, very strong and capable warriors, and they were kind of warriors that people wanted to fall behind. And it's interesting, it says in Medrash, by Shevet Dan, which we did last year, the word Akev is mentioned. By Shevet God, which we're talking about today, the word Akev is mentioned, and Akev means a heel. How was it mentioned by Shevet Dan? Dan is compared to a snake. Dan, Yadin Amika Achat Shifti Tzal Yi Dan Nachash Alei Derech Ki Shfifan Alei Erev. I forgot how the passage goes. Who Yushefenu Akev. Dan represents a snake that who Yushef Chalish Akev. This is someplace else. Dan represents getting somebody from the bottom. By God, it also says God Gedud Yuguden Who Yagud Akev. But it's explained in a very, very different way. Don's getting you from the heel connotes that Don catches you from underneath. In other words, he sneaks up on you. God's Achei has a number of different translations. First of all, God is considered a great warrior, that he attacks you from the front. And it says, V'torav zroya av kotka, the Parshas Vayeishev, that when he would kill people, he killed people without a tool, without even using a sword, with his own hand. He would knock a person with his arm and his head. But the lashon is zroya av kotka, the arm and the head. So the Midrashim ask, when you chop a person's head off, you swing down. So it should say, V'torav kotka dav zroya. Why does it say zroya av kotka? Because God would raise his sword before he could swing it down. They were incredible warriors. They're very, very great warriors. And the word Achei has many translations. One of them is God was a master at making it appear like they're losing. They would allow you to attack them from the front. And they would make it seem like they're losing. They would sneak up from behind, from the heel, and that's how they would win their battle. This is one of their tricks. It also happens, I'm going to get to it a little bit later, that Achei has to a Mashiach. There's a lot of Medrashim who say that Eliyahu Hanavi is from Shevet God. Even though everybody knows Eliyahu Hanavi was a Kohen. The last time I checked, Kohen were from Shevet Levi. So there's a whole big shtick, but apparently Eliyahu Hanavi's mother was from Shevet God. And Achei means the end of time, that God is going to be the one who's going to be Vasra Geula. That's one of the things that's brought in this Sfarim. But God is a great warrior, a very successful warrior.
His mother was from God. Why is it a contradiction?
That's the answer to the question. It's so complicated. It's really complicated. You know, when you learn Chazal, when you go to yeshiva and you hear stuff, you assume that what you heard is true, right? But when you learn more, you find out this is an opinion, and there's other opinions, right? The Gemara says it's a Kohen. The Midrashim say it was from God. The Midrashim say it was his mother. People sort of reconcile the Gemara with the Medrash that way. There's the Medrash that says it's from Binyamin. The Medrash says it's from... There's so many opinions. The Medrash Shleimer brings a half a dozen opinions which Shevet he was from. And he doesn't say them as this was his uncle and his mother and his mother's mother and it's Pushta Machlaikis. Okay, whatever. But the point is, it's not so simple, the answer that I'm giving you. It's an answer that makes me comfortable, but it's not so poshut that Eliyahu Navi's father was from a Kohen and his mother was from Shevet God. But that's how we're dealing with it. Another characteristic of Shevet God is people have to follow him. They trusted him. He was very, very trustworthy. Another idea that's written about Shevet God is he was the first one to ask for real estate in Eretz Yisrael. You know that Reuven and Gad took land east of the Yarden. Taking land east of the Yarden had a few advantages. First of all, why did God? God was the first one. Before Reuven, God came forward and said, give us land right here. And the Chumash says, and Rashi explains, that God's interest in taking land east of the Yarden was what? Huh? They wanted to be near Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, they wanted the Ohel next to them. Moshe Rabbeinu is in Shevet God. And they wanted to be next to Moshe Rabbeinu. And it's mentioned in one of the Sfar that I looked at today, that the Gemara says that Chias HaMesim happens only in Eretz Yisrael. This is a famous Gemara. But because Moshe Rabbeinu, and of course we say the same thing about all the tzaddikim, the rebbe and so on, are buried in Chutz Laretz, in this Chutz of Moshe Rabbeinu, we all have Chias HaMesim. So Shevet God asks for land east of the Yarden because they wanted to be near Moshe Rabbeinu. But there's two other consequences that come from that. Number one, they got their land without a goydel. God got its land without having to divide it. There was no lottery. Moshe gave him a big chunk. And number two, they got a very large territory. In terms of miles, they got the largest territory, a bigger territory even than Shevet Reuven. Which means what? That an enormous area, of course, real estate, like a real estate agent once told me, they're not making any more, you know. Real estate is finite. But it also means that a very large border. It also means that a lot of possibility to be attacked by neighbors. And it seems to me that this is part of the character of Shevet God. They're great warriors. On their flag, there was a picture of a legion of soldiers. And they're always fighting. They're succeeding, but they're always fighting. And it seems to me, this is sort of the caveat. This is the underside of Shevet God. Shevet God in so many ways is blessed. But Shevet God is fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. It almost seems like the fighting is a part of their reality. They're great warriors, they're successful people, they're considered tzaddikim, but for some reason the business of fighting wars never seems to escape them. They're constantly dealing with it. It says also that the stone on the Choshen, which belongs to Shevet God, is called Achlama, Aleph Ches Lamed Mem Hey, which means to be tough. Achlama means when the bullets start flying, you don't run. Achlama means a group of people. The stone, it has a segula, the stone has a property, that if you have this stone in your character, you're the kind of person who, when things get really, really tough and people run, you stand and fight. And this stone represents the character of Shevet God. Grade the Rabbeinu Bechaya writes that Achlam is crystal. And he adds, crystal is glass, achakal. Crystal is a very common, you can't call it a precious, it's a semi-precious material. And the reason it's so common, because God was involved with lots of people, because he was involved with lots of wars. Trying to imply that God's condition is constantly coming back. So God, this is what God is. They're in many ways very blessed, but they find themselves very, very often busy fighting battles. Their flag and their stone is black and white, and the Midrashim point out it's black and white and not red. They compare it that way, because the one thing I think about Shevet God there's a lot of things. Is God was righteous. God was not a Shevet that do it Averis. I'm going to get to this momentarily. Their world is black and white, but they seem to always find themselves in a place. At least that's how I understand it. They seem to always find themselves in a place where there's struggle, where there's strife. And I'll come to something fascinating, something very, very interesting. In light of what I just said, that Shevet's God's emergence into the world happens a little bit complicated because it's the only way such a neshama could be born. And that Shevet God is a very, very successful warrior, the kind of warrior that people want to follow, but that he can't escape war altogether. A fascinating mystical or spiritual idea emerges. The 12 Shvatim are divided into 4 camps. There's 12 tribes, but there's 4 camps. Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zvulun is one, and then Reuven, Shimon, and Gad is the second. Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zvulun are connected to Torah, or they're connected to light. Reuven, Shimon, and Gad are connected to Tshuva. Reuven, Shimon, and Gad are connected to Tshuva. Now, which of these 3 Shvatim is famous for his Tshuva? Ari, I just noticed you. Thank you for coming. Who is famous for his Tshuva amongst these 3? The one who's famous for his Tshuva is Reuven. Reuven does an Aveira, and he does Tshuva, right, according to the Gemara. Reuven did Tshuva because of Yehuda. When Yehuda did Tshuva because of Tamar, he motivated Reuven to do Tshuva. But the entire Machon, the entire camp of Reuven, Shimon, and Gad are associated with the idea of Tshuva because of Shevet Reuven. Shimon also has a connection to Tshuva for whatever reason. Shimon comes after Reuven. Bechal Shimon, I don't know if you remember, how can you remember the class on Shimon? It was 2 years ago, you probably were not here. Shimon's in trouble. Shimon and Levi start wars when they're young, right? They mess around with Shechem when they're young. And Levi figures out that he's got to get out of the business of killing. And Shimon never does. And that's why Shimon ends up suffering over and over again. So Reuven has to do tshuva for his stuff. Shimon has to do tshuva for his stuff. God does not have to do tshuva. God has to support the tshuva of Reuven and Shimon. That's how it comes out. In other words, Shevet God does not have Averis. But Shevet God is a warrior. And the mystical concept, the spiritual concept of being a warrior, that you have an enemy. And the enemy has to overcome. And of course, spiritually, the enemy is the Yetzer Hara. Worse than the enemy being the Yetzer Hara, there's the enemy of the sins I committed, which enhance the Yetzer Hara. You know how the Yetzer Hara works. If you never listen to Yetzer Hara, you have the easiest time dealing with him. If you listen to the Yetzer Hara, the more you listen to him, the more difficult it becomes to overcome. The Gemara says, Chazer v'shana nas l'ketev. If a person does an Aveda once, they feel terrible. Do an Aveda enough times, you have no guilt. In fact, you reach a point, which is called in the Inside Chassidus, Pri Kasol. You don't need any reason to do the Aveda. You can't stop yourself. A person who repeats an Aveda many times is very, very difficult to get out of. That's what makes tshuva so difficult. Reuven is doing tshuva. Shimon is doing tshuva. God provides the power. Shevet God is paired with Reuven and Shimon. And the way I understand it is that their inyan is tshuva. God's inyan is fighting. God is a tzaddik. But he finds himself, for some reason, Shevet God always finds himself in a situation where he's fighting. He's very successful, but the fighting never stops. Which means spiritually, Shevet God is one of those tzaddikim he's always got a speck in his voice. There's always an irritation that's causing him to fight. There's different kinds of people, and there's different kinds of tzaddikim. There are tzaddikim whose life is very peaceful and mellow. And the tzaddikim are constantly in overdrive. That's God. And God's energy, God's overdrive, so to speak, couples with Reuven and Shimon's tshuva to help them along. So the tshuva, the Aveda is not God's. But God always seems to find himself in the place where there's a struggle and they have to provide the power to overcome the struggle. Physically, they're protecting the borders of Eretz Yisrael. They're the largest border, which means they have the most to patrol and the most opportunity of people to breach their borders, enter their land. They constantly fight. They're always successful. They're busy fighting. And they provide the impetus for Reuven's tshuva, which leads to something else which is interesting. Again, along the same lines. If you follow this progression, right? The more I talk about it, the more I become extreme in how I'm describing it. The only way God could be born if there's a begida, if there's a cheat. God's neshama has to come in through something which is not precise. God's idea is that he's fighting many wars. God's idea is that he provides the power for tshuva, which leads to the next idea, that the Eliyahu HaNavi comes from Shevet God. Now this I didn't see in any of the Svarim, but I'm going to say this anyway, because I want to. Eliyahu HaNavi is famous for his kanos. Eliyahu HaNavi is famous for his kanos. Eliyahu HaNavi is a zealot. Eliyahu HaNavi is a radical. He protests and he protests and he screams. When he doesn't like what he sees, he screams against it. And Eliyahu HaNavi is kanos. Eliyahu HaNavi is Pinchas Eliyahu. There's a kid in this yeshiva whose name is Eliyahu Pinchas, right? Eliyahu Pinchas Eliyahu. Pinchas Eliyahu. Pinchas Eliyahu. The Rebbe once said, why did he say Eliyahu is Pinchas? Pinchas was before. And the Rebbe answered, because first he was a malach, Eliyahu HaNavi. Then he came down as a neshama, Pinchas. Then he was born again as a neshama, Eliyahu. He became a malach again. That's why it's called Pinchas Eliyahu.
He was born again as a Eliyahu, or just
the Gilgal. Pinchas Eliyahu. And Pinchas is for sure a kohen. So your name is... Of course he was. He was Aaron's grandson. He becomes a kohen. Eliyahu, your name is Pinchas Eliyahu. Pinchas Eliyahu. In any case, so there's Eliyahu HaNavi comes from Shevet God. So first of all, Eliyahu is a kanoi, and kanoi means a person who gets very upset that people don't do the right thing. And the Eliyahu HaNavi, this doesn't say in any Pirush, but I'm putting this in just because I want to. Eliyahu HaNavi says famously as Bris Choy Yitzayru. Eliyahu HaNavi says to the Eibishter that the Jews have stopped keeping the Bris Milah, the Bris, the covenant between us and God. And by the way, one of the weird things about this Shevet God guy, he was born with the Bris. I'm going to get to this soon. It all fits. Eliyahu HaNavi says to the Eibishter as Bris Choy Yitzayru, I need your attention, that the Yidden don't keep the bris, and the Eibishter gets upset with Eliyahu HaNavi. He says to Eliyahu, Yidden don't keep the bris. You are going to go to every single bris from now till Mashiach comes, and you're going to testify that Yidden are keeping the bris. If you think about it, there's 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. Yeah, there's, let's say, I don't know what percentage of Jews are officially from. Yeah. Of all the Yidden in this world who are at this particular moment not keeping all the mitzvahs, which mitzvah are they most likely to keep? Most likely to keep. The answer is bris. And if you think about it, it makes no sense. Why does the Yid keep a bris? Because his subconscious, his neshama knows this goes to the essence. Eliyahu HaNavi. Because he says, he speaks out and he says, as the Rambam writes it, Lashon Hara against Yidden that they don't keep the bris. The Eibishter says, you're going to go to every bris and you're going to testify that Yidden are keeping the bris. It's consistent with God's character. The character of somebody is always fighting. He's a tzaddik, but he's always fighting. But there's something else said about Eliyahu Hanavi. The Eliyahu Hanavi is Mavasar Agiul. Eliyahu Hanavi tells the Mashiach comes, which ties into two things. First of all, the word God, amongst the many translations of the word God, is the word Haggadah, the Magid. Eliyahu Hanavi tells us a Mashiach comes. So Eliyahu Hanavi, who comes from Shevet God, has to announce becoming a Mashiach. Now, what's the consistency here? The consistency is a very simple thing. It says in Gemara, it says in Rambam, and every Lubab knows this, that Mashiach comes from tshuva. Mashiach comes from tshuva. The Gemara says, Ein Yisrael Nagal Nala B'tshuva. The Gemara brings very strong lashonos about how Yidden are going to do tshuva. The Rambam brings it lahalacha. Hifticha Teira Yisrael B'Seiv Galusa and Eisin Tshuva Miyad Hein Nagol. The Teira guarantees Yidden are going to do tshuva. Mashiach is going to come. What's tshuva? Tshuva is overcoming obstacles. Tshuva is failing and succeeding, turning darkness into light. Eliyahu Hanavi, who comes from Shevet God, who's a tzaddik, but he's the kind of tzaddik who inside of himself and therefore outside of himself is always fighting. He is the one who announces Mavasa de Geulah. And what I'm correlating is that because God has a connection to tshuva, even if it's not for his Aveda, it's somebody else's Aveda, and tshuva is connected to Mashiach, this is why Eliyahu Hanavi, who comes from Shevet God, is the one who has to announce that Mashiach is coming. And this moves in the pasuk, God gedud yigudenu v'hu yagud Achei. God gedud yigudenu means he creates legions, armies to go out and fight. V'hu yagud Achei means in the end he wins, but Achei goes on Mashiach. V'hu eikev tishma'un. Yagud Achei, he's going to announce when Mashiach is coming. And of course this ties into the other thing that I mentioned already, is that it says in Rashi, when God is born, Leah says, Bo God, because he was born with the bris milah. Noilad mo. He's born with the bris. Now, it happens sometimes, by the way, the babies are born with the bris. And when a baby is born with the bris, you can't make a bracha, but you take blood. You have to take blood. It's called a tafas dam bris. God, Rashi says about Moshe Rabbeinu, also was born with gemalat. God was born gemalat. So it says Rabbeinu B'chaya, already circumcised. He had no arla. It says in Rabbeinu B'chaya, listen, that God was the 10th bris. The 10th. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Yeah, it's 3. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, that's 7. What comes next? Don Naphtali, not Yisachar, not Yisachar Zvulun, and then God. Please. God is the 10th. God is the 10th bris, and he's born circumcised. I'm going to explain this in light of sort of what I collected about Shevet God. God is born with a bris because God has no arla. The bris is a covenant between us and Hashem, which connects us to Hashem in a way which is completely unreasonable. The connection with Yidden and Eibush is infinite connection. The physical bris, it reveals it. But there's a covering, you have to remove it. By Shevet God, God is born with a bris. God is born with that connection to the Eibush on the deepest level intact. And that's why he has to come into the world through tricks. He can't come into the world directly.
Was Yaakov also?
I don't know, maybe. And by the way, the word Bogod, Beis Gimel Dal, missing the Aleph, is 9. Beis is 2, Gimel is 3, Dal is 4. 2 and 3 and 4 is 9, to indicate that there were 9 before him, and he was the 10th. But then there's the other translation, which is really the one that Rashi brings that's most famous. That Bogod means Bo Mazel Tov. God is born, he brings a good mazel into the world. Bogod, Bo Mazel Tov. In Rashi it's brought first, I left it for last. What's mazel? What's mazel? I know what mazel is. We translate mazel as luck and as fortune. I have no time, I'm sorry. Mazel literally means a drip. Like if you have a chas v'shalom, a person needs to get fluid or needs to get medication, so they have a bag, and they put a wire in your arm and they put it in, and they let gravity do it. Mazel means a drip. Mazel tov means that the source of this person on high in the subconscious and the levels of his neshama we're aware of is good. Ba God means ba mazel tov. God's personality, which on the one hand is very combative, on the other hand he's a tzaddik, he has a good mazel. There's something about God that you can't explain, that's positive. When I was writing my notes, I was thinking of the word chen. You know what chen means? Chen means grace and charm. Chen. Some people love chen. Some people have a lot of charisma. People are drawn to them. People have very little chen. Is chen a good thing or a bad thing? In Eishes Chayil it says sheker achen. Okay. Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Eibishter, no matasi chen. Chen, is chen a good thing or a bad thing? Chen means that you have a natural appeal, a magnetism. People meet you and they like you. Yeah. So it says in Sfat, it's a Chassidus, that if you're a good person, chen makes you a better person. If you're a bad person, chen makes you a worse person. That's correct. If you're an empty person, your charisma, your appeal helps you maintain that lie. God, Mazel Tov means God has good chen. God, Shevet God, the name God. The idea of Mazel Tov is that Shevet God has this property of a positive appeal. And the Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, there's a period. Rabbi Yossi Paltiel lived a long time ago. He has a Pirush on Chumash. Most of Rabbi Yossi Paltiel's Pirush on Chumash was lost. We don't have it. But people compiled from other sources that quote him. Rabbi Yossi Paltiel's Pirush on Chumash is lost. Even Ezra, you heard of Even Ezra, right? Even Ezra very often says, Upirush Hagoin. When Even Ezra says Pirush Hagoin, Hagoin is Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, but we don't have this Pirush. Rabbi Yossi Paltiel adds a very strong lashon. He says, what's touch Bo God? Bo emes. Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, who's older than Rashi and older than all the Rishonim, what does it mean, Bo God? Leah, a baby is born, and Leah says, Bo God. So Rashi says, Bo Mazel Tov. Right? I told you that Leah says, Bo Begida. This is deception. It's at somebody else's expense. But the Rasag says, Bo emes. God is emes. It's just his mitzias in this world is truth. The truth is the truth. And it shows itself in his ability to fight. What sort of emerges, what I sort of figured out from all my thinking, from all my planning is that if you if you expose people to risk, any kind of risk, there's always the possibility that they'll fail. If you expose a person to a physical risk, physical danger, they can get hurt. If you expose a person to a spiritual danger, they could fall. I think if you add up God, this is what you come away with. God lives on the edge, on the border. He protects the border. And he never fails. He doesn't fail physically, he wins all his battles. He doesn't fail spiritually, he remains, his bris is intact. You know how intact his bris is? He's born with a bris, he doesn't even need one. And God patrols and protects the borders. I don't only mean the physical borders, what's called in the language of Musa, chemes hadas, the borders that keep Yidden safe and in a correct and in a holy place. God represents, he sits on those edges always. And he doesn't fall off. He stays loyal to his mission. He never loses sight of his covenant and his purpose. The one thing about God that I find sort of frustrating, and that's how I'm finishing this class, he never finishes the fight. That line he never crosses. In other words, God is interesting. The more you learn about God, the more you like him. But he's fighting all the time. And it almost seems to me, I haven't prepared next week's class, but you know who doesn't fight? You know who gets peaceful? His brother Usher. His brother. He gets you to the precipice, but he's fighting. He's principled, he's righteous, but he's fighting. Usher has the peace. Okay, we'll do this next week in Mitzvah Shem.